Hello, DMV. Happy Tuesday evening. It's Kevin here, and we are doing a live stream tonight. Had some kind of crazy weather here recently. I have to be honest with you, I'm wearing slippers in my basement and this little jacket here because I can't quite figure out this weather. I mean, it's like I've had it, I think, on AC, I've had on heat today, and I've had it off, and I've been freezing all day. So anyways, kind of crazy weather. We got a lot of rain coming through, but that's not what we're talking about tonight. Tonight, we're going to talk about the collapse of the real estate spring market. And I've got a special guest with us tonight. I'm actually bringing him back. He was here a few weeks ago, and that's going to be Craig Sword. But before we introduce him and bring him in, there's been a lot of recent articles that have come out in some of the national publications that have talked about just the spring market being a dud. And, normally the spring market is the time of year when you see the most amount of listings come on the market, and you also see the greatest amount of buyers and the greatest amount of demand in the marketplace. And a lot of that is because, days get a little bit longer. Weather is obviously a little bit nicer in most cases. And we're also, people start to think about making those transitions from one home into another in between school years. So spring is a good time to start the search in hopes to find a property in spring and maybe close either late spring or maybe sometime early to midsummer. So usually that is going to be the bomb diggity of all times to sell a house as well as to purchase a house. But this year, I have to tell you, a lot of publications are saying that's not so. And we're also seeing a lot of signs in the DMV that follow some of the articles we're seeing. So today, once again, we're going to talk a little bit about that, and then we're going to bring it all home and discuss what's going on locally here in the DMV with one of the experts at my office at Compass, Craig Sword. And so with all that being said, let's go ahead and introduce everybody to Craig.
Hey, how's it going, Kevin?
Hey, man, how you doing?
Doing well, man. Thanks for having me back.
Absolutely. I wouldn't have you back unless, I thought you could produce, and, you did a great job last time. And I'm sure you're going to do the same thing. It's funny because you and I, every Monday, we have a meeting at our office in Potomac, and you and I tend to be some of the more vocal ones there. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, for better or for worse. We're probably two of the more vocal people. So it's nice to get to do it with just you on this platform.
Exactly. Well, I appreciate that. So what's been, I think you said you had appointments today and you just finished up. So I appreciate you kind of finishing that up and coming in, and you're in the office there tonight, kind of late.
Yeah, I am battling a little bit of a cold. I just finished up a few appointments, so I figured I would kind of knock this out here at our office in Park Potomac.
Awesome. Well, you know what? If you happen to sneeze or cough, we will say bless you or goods on night or whatever. But
I appreciate that.
Anyways, let's go ahead first and let's jump right into it and bring up one of the few articles that we've been seeing coming up here, and this comes from the Wall Street Journal, and I believe this actually came out last week. And the spring home sale season is shaping up to be a dud. Inventory is rising, but high home prices, just went past it, but high home price and mortgage rates are putting off buyers during the prime selling season. So let's scroll down and we'll take kind of a little bit of a look at that. Key points: the housing market's spring selling season is shaping up as a disappointment with rising inventory and tepid demand. Economic uncertainty and high mortgage rates at around 6.75 deter potential buyers despite falling prices in some areas. And then it also states here, sellers face challenges due to increased inventory, builder incentives for new homes, and hesitant buyers. The troubled housing market can't seem to get back on track. So what are your thoughts on that, Craig? I mean, are you do you think that's overhyped, or do you think that's about right?
Honestly, that's kind of spot on. And normally I don't agree with the big news headline. All the things that they're kind of touching on in that article are seeming to be true, from a boots on the ground level. I think that there's definitely more inventory than there's been for a while here in our local market. It seems like homes are not being sold for, oftentimes over asking price. Oftentimes they're being sold for under asking price. Not as many offers on them. A lot of contingencies coming, home inspections, appraisals, financing, and seller credits. Basically a seller offering the buyer cash to purchase their home if they're not able to sell it in a short enough period of time. So yeah, I think it's spot on.
Yeah, I'm seeing the same thing. So let's dive into it a little bit more here. So it says the inventory of homes for sale is steadily rising, but demand is still tepid. Home prices in parts of the country are falling, but with prices not much below record highs, many would-be buyers are still squeezed out. Mortgage rates are hovering around 6.75, more than double the level of only a few years ago. The crucial spring selling season is shaping up as a dud, crushing hopes that a housing market that has been anemic for more than 2 years can gain significant momentum for this year. And then it goes on to say, it definitely feels like a disappointment, said Selma Hepp, chief economist of Cotality, a real estate data provider. Yeah, I mean, you and I both work with home buyers and home sellers, and there's a lot of conversations being had these days. And what one of the things we've discussed on here before is that, typically the public is usually about 6 months behind where the actual market is. As you said earlier, we're kind of boots on the ground. We're seeing it daily and everything. I mean, have you seen, significant change, in the last, let's say, month or so? I mean, because here we are, middle of May. Actually, we're getting towards the end of May right now. And so we are at the probably, I would always say that the spring market, in my opinion, some would say it ends at Memorial Day. I usually say that it goes into about mid-June when, kids are let out of school. At that point, then you usually enter more of a summer market. So,
Sure.
we probably, at best, 3 weeks left of this spring market. But have you seen actual changes occur within this spring market?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think we've seen it on a larger level for, roughly 6 months, 5, 6 months or so. But I think over the last 30 to 60 days, it feels like the level of homes that are kind of not selling quickly and staying on the market for a longer period of time are increasing. It seems like buyers are not as itching to pull the trigger on a home, and a lot of people are kind of going out casually shopping, and there's just so many variables right now, from all the different news cycles that are going around, the tariffs, just the level of uncertainty with people losing their jobs. And then on top of it, it's like, number one, you have higher, higher interest rates than we would like to have for most people. And I think a lot of times when you have too much selection than what buyers are used to, it makes it more difficult to make a decision on purchasing a home. So the search takes longer. But yeah, last 30 to 60 days, I have definitely seen it at minimum stay the same, if not, become more and more of a buyer's market.
Yeah. And I also want to throw out there too, any of you guys watching, we love questions. So feel free to join in, type in a question if you have any questions. It could be about this topic. It could be about a different topic, because you know what? As real estate agents, Craig and me, we're pretty damn good at pivoting if we have to, right, Craig?
Right. Yeah.
So if anybody wants to talk about a different subject, bring it on. I mean, it should be somewhere within the real estate industry. But anyways, any questions, feel free to go ahead and chime in. We'd love to answer some of those questions. But yeah, I agree too, Craig. I mean, to me, it feels like it's changing almost daily in the marketplace right now. And it's, I've had a few properties that, I put on the market that, and you kind of what to expect, what you would have had for the same property a year ago. I kind of also know what I would have had I put, the same property on the market maybe 3 months ago, or hell, even 3 weeks ago. But things seem to be changing very quickly right now, and that's the kind of the unsettling part of it, and I agree with you also that buyers were used to scarcity, and they would, oftentimes, they would jump on something that may have checked off 5 or 6 and a half boxes on a 10 scale. And now it's like, it needs to be damn close to a 10. Now you're never going to get 10 boxes checked off on 10 out of 10, but it needs to be pretty close. It needs to be, a good 9.5 in many cases for these buyers to move on it. So.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, look, I think it really, like, for my team and I'm sure you, I mean, we're having a phenomenal year, and I'm having a lot of success with clients and buyers and sellers. And I think that ultimately, no matter really what the market is doing, if you're a consumer, buyer or seller, and you align yourself with a really, really good agent, you're going to figure out a path to have great success. I mean, I think from, representing sellers, and if you are a seller in this market, when you are marketing and promoting your home and bringing it to the market, you need to go the extra mile with, your photo package, you with potentially staging the property, with doing things to the property to get it market ready, painting, all sorts of remodeling potentially. And if you do those things and you price it attractively or fairly, I think you're going to do great. I think that, what we're seeing is, for the last 5 years, it's really been a very much so seller's market, right? And the prices have just been going up and going up and going up. And, it's starting to correct a little bit. And I'm kind of with it. I think the buyers need the pendulum to swing back in their favor a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. I compare it like to fishing, and for like 4.5 years, it was like, we went out on a boat and we had fish actually jumping into the damn boat. I mean,
Right.
they were jumping right in, and you had your pick of many. And right now it's like, and I'm also a very frustrated fisherman, Craig. Something you may not know about me. I don't do it that often, but I have done it quite a bit over the years. And that's why you kind of have a tackle box, because you got a bunch of different baits in there, and you try one thing out there and you kind of fish it around. And, if they're not biting, then maybe sometimes it's just switching up the color, switching up this. Sometimes it's switching up the presentation, because, it's the fish are sitting back and they're kind of fat and happy and they're not real over anxious. And so you got to throw a bunch of different things out there, really just bait that hook. And I think that's kind of what you're saying is you need to have more bait on that hook today than you did a few years ago,
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you
or
really
even a
have to
few
go
months
to work.
ago.
Yeah, exactly. You have to, you just have to do more. You have to align yourself with a really good agent, have a really good plan and execute it. Whereas, years ago when the market was heavily on the seller side, potentially could just put a sign out in the front yard, and there was so little inventory and so much demand based upon interest rates. I mean, you didn't have to do too much, right? From the buyer perspective, though, I'm kind of loving this market. I mean, I get that, people are not necessarily always ready to pull the trigger, and they have to see a lot of homes before they make their decision. But you have a lot of opportunities right now as a buyer to get homes for a really good sticker price. You can potentially get seller credits structured into the deal, home inspection contingencies, appraisal contingencies, longer closing dates. I mean, world's your oyster.
Yeah, yeah. We're gonna go. We're gonna take a look, because an article came out. I think it was earlier today or yesterday, about the tariff turmoil taking a bite out of the spring home sales market here. And I'm just kind of curious with, I mean, the whole tariff thing came out, what, maybe 6-8 weeks ago or so. Obviously, followed immediately with the stock market plunging, and now the stock market's kind of rushed back and everything. I mean, do you see any correlation with the slowing down of our spring market to tariffs in general, or do you think it's a bunch of different things? I'm curious about that.
I think it's one of many pieces. And, just from the stance of, I've been working with, dozens of buyers and sellers over this period of time. And I have not had one person come to me and say, you know what, I'm either not buying a home because of the tariffs, or I'm not ready to sell my home based on the tariffs. But it's a news cycle, and it creates a level of uncertainty, whether you're a buyer or seller. And from that standpoint, I do get it. I think with some of the other things that have happened in the administration, like with Doge and people losing their jobs or having to move closer to the city for work and so on and so forth, I have had clients where that has directly impacted them and either caused them to buy, sell, or neither. But yeah, I think the tariff is just one of many variables.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I mean, to me, I think that it just kind of, this year started off very, very, very erratic, especially locally here with the layoffs and all the Doge effect and everything. And that's what we were all talking about 3 or 4 months ago. We haven't really talked about that as much. And then right as things seemed to be kind of steadying out, we started getting to the middle of the spring market. Then all of a sudden it's like, tariffs and, stock market, plunging and everything. And to me, it was kind of like almost a little bit of like the dagger there where it's like, all right, enough. It's like too hot here right now,
Right.
And maybe this isn't a good time, so that's kind of what I see. And once again, you're working with a bunch of different buyers and everything. I mean, have you had some buyers this spring who have kind of said, you know what, hey, Craig, we want to kind of watch from the sidelines, or we want to take a rest right now? I mean, have you had any of that recently?
Yeah, I mean, I have, and I always have that though, and I don't know if I've had an increasing amount of that. And I mean, I think that what I have seen is that the time frame when a buyer is really actively looking and actively searching for homes week in and week out, that time frame might have elongated until they actually find a home and get it under contract and move and so on and so forth. Where I can't pull up data, but if it was 90 days, maybe it's 120 days now, right? And I think
Right.
it's just a longer process, mainly because there's more inventory, right? I think for me, most of the stuff just comes down to supply and demand.
Right. Yep.
Yeah,
Gotcha. So we have a comment here, a Daniel Lowry. Have you ever heard of him? Daniel Lowry.
I
Kind of
have.
the name sounds familiar. He says they call it fishing, not catching. I don't really know what that means. Maybe I said something about catching. I'm not 100% sure, but
Yeah.
Danny, if you're seeing this, I may not want you to elaborate on what you're talking about there. So, I mean, if you elaborate, this is a family program, so at least keep it PG-13. So I'm not 100% sure what you're talking about there, but anyways. Also have a question from Erin. She asks, are there any areas in the DMV that are not seeing a slowdown, or are there types of homes that seem to be insulated, i.e. townhomes versus single families?
That's a really good question. And I think, and I can let you take it, Kevin, but from my standpoint, I think that there are certain neighborhoods and certain areas that are not seeing as much of the impact and are still much more of a seller's market in these neighborhoods. But they've kind of always been those neighborhoods. And no matter what is going on in the economy or interest rates or supply and demand or whatever it might be, they kind of always stay a little bit insulated. I think that those neighborhoods that are these more sought after locations are becoming fewer and further between, right? And I think for the most part, if we just look at it on a larger scale, there's a lot more homes coming available. Homes are not selling as fast. Homes are not selling for as high of prices, and buyers are able to have more opportunities than they've had in the past, handful of years.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that it is a good question. And I'm just speaking out right now. I mean, like I had a property, Craig. I think I don't know that you actually said you were going to show it, but you didn't show it. But anyways, it's all right. It's sold in North Potomac, and this was one over in the Wooten School District. It was priced at $950. We put that on the market about 3 weeks ago, and the house was in good condition, but it was good, solid condition, well cared for. I'm being careful with how I'm saying this. But it was very dated in areas. And if my clients are watching, they would agree with that. We've had that conversation. So I'm not saying anything about their house that I haven't told them themselves. But that location was, and that price point was primo, under $1 million, Wooten School District. And, we had it on the market. I think it was 5-6 days. And, we had probably 15, 16 showings. Now, I do think last year we would have had 30 showings. I had probably 30 people, 40 groups of people through the open house. But that is the only property this spring where I've seen activity like that. Most of the other areas that I've had that have been more kind of central part of Montgomery County to upper part of Montgomery County, it's been a lot more slow. I mean, it's been, one, maybe 2 showings a week in some cases. It's really kind of started to come down to a trickle. And, it's just, once again, it's, unless you're like a real high demand school district or maybe a high demand neighborhood, like, in this more the central to upper part of Montgomery County, the Kentlands market still seems to do very well. But Kentlands is so unique to just about anything else in the DMV and certainly in Montgomery County that it kind of is its own like entity there. It's the community more so than necessarily the houses themselves, or it's combined, I guess you could call it.
Right.
But some of these other areas, with nice homes and nice nice neighborhoods that I think that heck 3 months ago would have been seeing 10 or 15 showings a week. You could expect maybe 2 or 3 offers in. Now we're starting to see a showing or 2 a week, and offers are hard to come by unless you're really in great condition and priced lower than the competition that's out there. And as we've discussed, the competition's growing.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. And just to piggyback real quick, and I mean, I think, one of the areas that you mentioned, and to get back to the initial question, there are, areas that are not as affected. But just like you mentioned, like, the property that you mentioned in the school district in that area is a pretty coveted area in our, market. But you're still getting less showings, you're getting less offers, and you're not selling it for what you would more than likely sell it for 6 months ago, 9 months ago, 12 months ago. So again, if you're a buyer and you're going after these sought after areas, you still have a better opportunity than you've had. It's just, might not be a case scenario where no one else is competing against you, but
Yeah. So we have another question that comes in from Tom Yarmus. Hey, Tom, thanks for watching tonight. And Tom says, I think it's more related to the interest rates. The monthly mortgage payment is putting things out of reach for many buyers. Thoughts, Craig?
Very good comment. And I mean, I think that for me, what he's kind of describing here, as well as, just inventory and supply and demand, are really the main 2 things that contribute to the market. And we can go into news cycles and all of these other things, but yeah, look, when I represent a lot of buyers, and when we take a look at homes and we kind of sit down with the lender and break down all the numbers, it doesn't look great for a lot of people with a 6%, 7% interest rate. And it's maybe not what they are anticipating when they look to have these numbers of their monthly mortgage payment, their cash to close, so on and so forth. I've been having a lot of success in either obviously creating, good, hey, this is the price point that we should go after and this is what we should focus on. But to be honest with you, it's one of these scenarios where if you're a buyer, you can land something with like a huge seller credit, right? That's not selling. You can take those funds and use it to, help pay your down payment, help pay your closing costs, or buy the interest rate down. I just had a scenario like this where they bought the interest rate way down and the mortgage payment dropped because of it. So yes, I 100% agree with that question. But I think if you are working with a good agent in this market and you are a home buyer, you have a lot of options that you may not think you have.
Give me an example. You were talking to me a little bit about this situation. Give me an example when you say that you negotiated a huge seller credit and you ended up using that seller credit to buy down the rate. So why don't you kind of talk through, give us an example of how much seller credit did you negotiate? How much did you get the rate down? And maybe you also want to just explain a little bit about, how like discount points work for those who maybe don't follow
Yeah,
that.
I mean, look, it basically, and I won't bring up the exact specific scenario because we're under contract and we haven't closed the transaction yet, but just for like an easy scenario, right? If you're looking at a single family home in, a nicer part of Montgomery County, let's say, and let's say the price tag on that home is $1 million, okay? If the home's been on the market for weeks, potentially months, and it's really not selling and not doing super well in the market, number one, you and your agent should be game planning. Okay, we're going to get this thing under asking price. The question is how low. Okay, we're going to be able to potentially do a home inspection contingency, have an appraisal contingency, whatever we want. But in reality, instead of just focusing on getting the price lower on the sticker price, you can structure in a seller credit or bake that into your offer price and use the cash extracted from the seller to cover down payment, cover closing costs, and buy your interest rate down. I'll give you an example. If there's $1 million home, right? You could write an offer for 950,000 and say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, we would like a $50,000 seller credit, right? So from the seller standpoint, that's an offer of 900,000. Okay. It's the same thing as an offer for 900,000. The difference is that you're getting a loan based upon 950. The home's priced at $1 million, but you get a $50,000 check from the seller just to buy the home. And you can use that for a magnitude of things, but one of them would be buying the interest rate down from 6.75 to 5.5, or whatever you and your lender can kind of work out.
Right. Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's definitely, and those are things that not every agent talks to their buyers about, and gives them those ideas. And now, of course, once again, a few months ago, it wasn't even possible as you homeowners that would even consider. I mean, if you went in there like that, a year ago, you'd be like completely laughed at, even on. So, definitely, but today, those are things that are possibilities out there. Actually, and Tom, you kind of lead with a good point. There's also one of the articles that I wanted to bring up too, comes from realtor.com, and it's talking about Powell announced last week that, guess what? Fed warns interest rates could remain higher for longer. And of course, I mean, it doesn't really mention that they're talking about rates going up, but it just looks like we're kind of, in this malaise here where it's just going to kind of stick between this 6.5% to 7.5% range, which just seems like we've been at now for the better part of 3 years. I mean, it's been as high as 8%. So, I mean, right now, comparatively, over the last 3 years, the rates are probably kind of near the lowest point they've been. But at the same time, too, this certainly isn't news that's going to help the spring market and help, anybody that's a home seller or home buyer for that matter. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's, I read these things and, I never know, hey, what rates are going to do. I don't have a crystal ball. And you're right, they've been floating around this, 6.25 to 7.5 range for quite a while now. And I think there's a big difference between those two numbers, just mentally for buyers. Um, I think for me, a lot of times it comes down to if I'm representing a buyer and they're planning, they can afford the mortgage payment at, let's say, a 7% interest rate, and they're planning on being in the home for a much longer period of time. Number one, at some point during that long period of time, they're probably going to have an opportunity to refinance at a lower interest rate, right? Number two, they can talk with their lender about other options, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be a 30-year fixed mortgage. I have a lot of clients who are doing 7 1-year ARMs and different things to kind of take advantage of where we're at in the interest rate market. From a seller standpoint, look, higher rates, you're going to have less buyer pool looking at homes. So again, you need to be focusing on the things that you can control and market the heck out of your home, get with a really, really good agent, and get your home market ready and price it attractively. That's really all you can control.
Now, you know what? Actually, before we jump into, I had a comment, but Aaron is asking, is the lender supposed to advise me on the options, or is it my realtor's responsibility? That's a good question.
I think it depends on which options. I mean, I kind of like to look at it as a team effort, really. And I mean, I think it's, once you are, if you're an agent who's working with a buyer, you really want to be on the same page with everybody. And when I go tour homes with, prospective buyers and we have some level of interest in it, one of my first calls, other than the listing agent, is to the lender and say, hey, we want to take a look at some different estimates based upon this property, what the property taxes are, so on and so forth. And yeah, so I mean, I think it's both to answer your question.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, it should be collaborative. I always say that, like to a home buyer, is that your realtor and your mortgage lender are like your left and right arm, and they've got to be kind of in sync and really advocating for the buyer and giving them as many options and choices so that they can make the very best decision for themselves. But that's a great question. Kelsey asks, are buyers still needing to bypass normal contingencies like home inspections, or has that changed? And so, Kelsey, I think you came in a little bit late on it, but we do appreciate the question. Yeah, what we're seeing right now is that you're seeing a market that, to be quite honest with you, I would say it's a balanced market right now. And in some areas, it may be even more a buyer's market than it is a seller's market. And right now, in a balanced market, or one that might even favor home buyers right now, yeah, I mean, most buyers are getting those contingencies right now. The home inspections, the radon tests, the appraisal contingencies, the financing contingencies. I mean, those contingencies, they're back, baby. So we're seeing those all the time right now. However, and I think Craig would agree with this, when I still do prepare buyers that, it's all case by case. You know, right now, while yes, we're starting to see a kind of a slowdown and a pullback in the market with buyer demand, I mean, there still are those properties that are, as Craig likes to say, give me a brand new kitchen. You got those great kitchens and baths and everything, with a lot of those, the sex appeal. And it's still not uncommon that you might be up against, 2, 3, 4 buyers. And so each case, it's just that, or each house, it's case by case. And that's where, like, a good agent can get in there and get a feel for the level of interest that's there. If it's been on the market for 25 days and they have no offers in on it, that's not a guarantee that when you write an offer that there might not be somebody else doing it at the same time. If anything, it seems to be there's this weird, crazy, mojo that when one person's interested in a property that seems to be sitting, another person comes in at the same time. I've seen that all the time. But we're seeing more cases right now where buyers are going in and it's mano a mano. It's buyer against seller. And when those homes have been on the market for a little bit longer, there's no doubt the buyers have more leverage to potentially negotiate price, terms, closing cost help, contingencies, and all those things. So, that's a real change, and it's in the marketplace that we've seen for, geez, Craig, I'm going to say it, for a freaking half a decade now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Half a freaking decade, man.
Yeah, and I'm liking it, honestly. I like it. I think, it's fun putting on the negotiating cap and, getting a really, really well executed deal done for either your buyer or your seller. And I've had successes on both sides of the aisle. A lot of opportunities for buyers like we've been talking about, but just yesterday, my colleague and I, who were listing a property, we got one under contract after being on the market for 5 days, got 4 offers, well over asking price, 0 contingencies whatsoever. So you can win on both sides of this. And I just, for me, the really, really good agents are going to thrive, and they're going to do phenomenal, and they're going to get great opportunities for their clients. And, maybe the agents who are not so great, I think, are going to have a tough time.
Yeah. So talk about that property that you put on the market, 4 offers. What was the secret sauce there?
So leading up into it, we had a while to kind of figure out what we were going to do, right? As far as price point, and we didn't have to rush to market, so to speak, right? So I came out and looked at the property, looked at a lot of the stuff that's been selling in or around the neighborhood, and I had a pretty good idea on price point and where I think we wanted to price it. I also talk with the seller very openly and say, like, hey, what do you know the neighborhood better than anybody. You live here. What do you think the home is worth? What do you want to sell it for? What's your dream price? So having that collaborative discussion is the start. But for this property, we came in and we probably spent 25 to $30,000 on renovations, including refinishing the flooring, doing some stuff to the kitchen, some painting, some bathroom stuff, some exterior landscaping, all that kind of jazz. And then, I'm a big fan of really, going very, very strong on the photo and marketing and promotion package. I think you should spare zero expense because that's the way that buyers are interacting with your property. I see a lot of homes out there, and you go on any platform and you could just look at the photos and you're like, this doesn't look very great. And then some others look fantastic. And I'm telling you, buyers are going to, respond to the ones that look fantastic. Also, and Kevin and I have talked about this, off the live stream, but I think if you have a property that's vacant and the seller is not living in the home, I really would strongly suggest staging it with a great staging company, amazing furniture. Do it before you do the photos. And, people respond to that when they come to see the home. They see, this really nice furniture. They see how the home would be set up if they lived there. And you just got to do everything right to have a lot of success. If you just stick a sign out in the ground, the home's vacant, you don't do a lot of work, it could sit for a while.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, and that's a great point with the staging. And it's one that, and it's interesting because the word staging, I think it can be kind of confused. I mean, you know, um, the majority of homes that I have on the market where people live in there, we do stage them. Now, the majority of the time it's with their own stuff. And a lot of times it's eliminating certain things, maybe purchasing some new things, especially, things like comforters and pillows and linens and towels and things like that. And then rearranging the furniture. And sometimes it's also filling in some artwork and things like that, maybe either purchasing it or renting it or whatever. But when it comes to a lot of the vacant homes that I've had over the last few years, to be quite honest with you, we've staged very few of them. I mean, we get the place Q-tip clean. I mean, it is clean, and we have it, in most cases painted and the flooring done, and maybe we've
I can't hear you. Sorry, Kevin.
dang it. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I got you. I was watching your lips move, but I couldn't
It was
hear the
good.
last 2 minutes of what you said.
It was good stuff. Sorry about that.
No
Yeah,
worries.
I hit my mic there. All right, I'm going to go back on it and just say that that's one of the epiphanies that I'm kind of getting from this, in the changing market right now, is that the majority of the homes that I have on the market where people live in there, we do stage them, and oftentimes it's a combination of using what they have and maybe filling in with some things that a stager might provide or whatever, and of course
Yeah.
getting the expertise of a stager on how to, what to get rid of, what to keep, how to lay it all out and everything. But a lot of the vacant homes that I've had, we paint them, we get the flooring done, we get oftentimes enhance the lighting. But a lot of them I haven't staged over the last few years, and that's one thing that I'm really going to go, really start to emphasize moving forward, is having those vacant homes staged right now.
Yeah, I think it's super important as a seller in this market. And, just from the data that I've been doing and representing sellers, it's been going much better than not staging. So, it can't hurt and it can only help. And ideally, you'd like a property to be vacant. You'd like to really stage the whole thing, in my opinion. But not everybody can do that. Sometimes you're selling a property where the seller is occupying the home. So there are certain limitations. But ideally, if the home can be vacant and completely staged from top to bottom, that would be my preference.
Right, right. What are and I'm going to kind of go off topic here. I've asked this question a few times on my live stream. What are your thoughts on virtual staging? I'm curious about this.
Not a fan.
Not a fan at all.
Not a fan at all.
What?
No.
Why? And I'm going to tell you why I think, but I'm curious what your thoughts on that.
I think it doesn't look good from the beginning of the sales cycle for a buyer when they're searching online and they see those photos. I don't think it looks fantastic at all. In fact, I don't think it looks good. And yeah, I just think it looks cheap and tacky, and it's just not a fan. I've never had one. I work with a lot of buyers, a lot of really great buyers, and I've never had anybody come up to me, show me a virtually staged property and say, "Look at the photos on this." Now,
Yeah.
I've had the exact opposite when it's completely staged and beautifully redone and so on and so forth. But not a fan.
I'm going to go back to what I just said. I mean, to me, that that online experience has to be matched by the in-person experience, and so if you're going to get them all excited and wowed online, looking at their phone to get them to come on out and see this property, I mean, what they see when they get there, it has to match what brought them there to begin with.
Yeah, what a letdown. If someone did like the virtual staging and it was beautiful furniture and they got there and there's nothing there, I mean, it's not going to be a good experience.
Worse than nothing there.
Worse furniture.
What about the situation where worse than nothing there? What about when you get there and you see the carpet with the furniture impressions in it where it used to be, and where the freaking lazy boy was, where Pops, would go back on his lazy boy and it kind of brushed up against the wall and you got the scuff marks and stuff like that. I mean, it's like, to me, it's the dagger of death. I mean, it's like, oh God.
I would tell that seller of that home to work with another agent.
Yeah, I mean, Craig, I know you have no experience with this, but it's a little bit like online dating. I mean, it's like, when you set that date and you show up at the Starbucks or, the Ruth's Chris or wherever, Starbucks is definitely going to be more affordable. But you can't be meeting somebody whose photos are from 2017 or like pre-pandemic or whatever.
Your high school yearbook photo. Yeah.
Exactly. So I didn't really plan on going there, but since you mentioned stage, I always have to ask that because we're seeing more and more of that. But and I've had clients of mine ask me about it, and to this point, like, I don't know that I would lose a listing over it if somebody was like demanding it. I mean, I think today I would just push harder to have them invest money into the staging, but anyways, what is the conversations like right now with your home buyers? I said earlier, I'm kind of preparing my home buyers for just about everything, whereas a year ago, and especially 2 or 3 years ago, I mean, it was just like, it was ruthless. It's like, guys, I love you here, but, let's get real right now. And, you're just extremely brutal with the reality of the marketplace. And right now, I kind of have to touch upon just about everything. What do your conversations look like when you're first meeting with buyers for the first time that are looking to purchase? What does that look like right now?
On a first meeting, you could go and talk forever about the intricacies of the entire buying process and the market conditions and, I try not to like overload people in the beginning. I think it should be fun in the beginning. And when you're meeting with a buyer, you kind of just talk to them about what they're looking for a home. What type of home, what area, how many bedrooms, bathrooms, does it have a yard, all the fun stuff, right? And then my job in the beginning is really to get them in front of every possible option that could possibly check their boxes. And I do this by setting up like a personalized search portal for them, but I also go in and like hand pick properties multiple times a week. And I ping them and I say, hey, just wanted to check in. I went through these properties. I think they might be a good fit based upon what you're looking for. I think in the beginning, it's also good for them to start the pre-approval process with a mortgage lender, just so they have a basic understanding of the numbers. And they say, okay, I'm a home buyer. My budget is $500,000 to $600,000. Based upon that, this is what my mortgage payment would be. This is what my cash to close, my down payment. So we understand stuff, and that way, when we go out to see the home and it's absolutely perfect, we're not behind the eight ball. We know what to do.
Right, right. The first broker I worked for, he would call that. Actually, it wasn't really my first broker. It was one of the original OG real estate sales trainers. It was Floyd Wickman. He used to have this course called the Sweatthogs, and I took the Sweatthogs in I think 1991 or something. And the deal with those classes or the courses is that you had to call down like the reverse telephone book at the time. They called it the crisscross directory. You had to call down streets and you had to keep calling until you got an appointment. And once you got an appointment, if you got an appointment, the first to list a property, this had nothing to do with buyers. This was all about listings. If you got an appointment, the first call, you're done. But usually that wasn't the case. But anyways, I'm getting off track, but he used to call that the safe island approach, where you take them around the whole island so that they can see the whole island and make sure that it's safe to jump off on, which it sounds like, is what you do. Let's take a look at, what you're going to need as far as down payment and closing costs and what the monthly payment's going to be. Let's make sure you're pre-approved. Let's, get that portal set up. So they're really kind of searching that whole island to make them feel comfortable when they find the right one, that they know and that they're the real deal and they can strike hard when they find the right property.
Yeah, yeah. And I try to make it as fun as possible. It's already a stressful process, especially as a first-time home buyer who's never gone through it before. So, start out and make it fun. And you're going to learn so much. If you have a really good agent, as you just go out and tour homes week in and week out, you're going to learn so much. That good agent is going to be giving you information on the market, offer strategy, things to look for in a home, financing options, all sorts of stuff. So, in the beginning, focus on finding the right home, and then eventually it'll fall into place.
Yeah. Hey, and I'm going to throw it out there. Anybody has any questions? I see quite a few people on here right now. If you've got any questions, if you're thinking about buying, you're thinking about selling, or you're just confused about what the hell is going on, or you just have once again, you have any type of thing that you want to talk about real estate off topic here, feel free to go ahead and throw in a question. We'd be happy to bat it around. And usually Craig and I can figure out the answer to just about anything. Craig said earlier he doesn't have a crystal ball, but I do have a magic 8-ball, which every now and then we need to go to it to get answers. So, we've got our little safety net there. Anyways, let's talk a little bit. We're going to bring it home here right now. And I kind of went through the data on the Montgomery County market today. And what's interesting is one of the articles that we pulled up, and we don't need to pull it up again. I'm actually looking back at notes, but one of the articles that was talking about, the spring market being kind of a dud said, and this is all these statistics are national. It says that the active listings are up nearly 17% nationally from where it was last year. But the interesting thing is, Craig, and I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. First of all, first question is I know you know this answer. Is inventory higher today than it was this time last year, or lower, or is it the same?
Higher.
You are correct. How much higher?
I don't know. That's a good question. In our market, I'm going to just 15%.
Right now, our inventory is 75.5% higher than it was this time last year.
Oh my God. I was going on the low end. I probably wanted to be somewhere in the middle there. Yeah, it feels like that. Yeah, there's a lot more options.
I'm actually looking at it right now. So May 1st, and then numbers are higher right now, but May 1st, we had 1,625 listings on the market, active on the market. Now, these are in MLS. These are not private exclusives or anything like that, So 1,625 listings on the market as of May 1st of this year, 926 the same time last year. That's
Wow.
freaking crazy.
And this is Montgomery County, you said?
This is Montgomery County.
Okay.
75.5% more inventory.
Wow.
Also interesting for April, new listings. There were 1,152 new listings that came on the market during the month of April. That was up 6% from April of 2024. New pendings, meaning those homes that went under contract during the month of April, there were 978, which sounds like a lot, and it is, but that was down 10%. So we've got, inventory up 75.5% from where it was this time last year. And the sales for the month of April were down 10%. Average days on market, 19 days versus 15 last year. And then, what's interesting, average sales price to original list price ratio on average, this is April. I think this is going to come down some in May, but average sales price to original list price was 99.7%, whereas the year before it was at 103%. So for those of you kind of watching and listening out there, last year, during the month of April, the average home that sold in Montgomery County sold 3% over list price. So if it was a $500,000 home, on average, it sold for $515,000. If it was $1 million home, on average, it sold for $1,030,000. Today, they're selling just under list price at 99.7%. So that's a big. 99.7% is still a pretty good number, but that's way off of where it was this time last year.
I think I think it's trending downward a little bit more too. I don't think we've seen, the most recent numbers, but that is certainly the way that it feels out there.
Yep. Now the interesting thing is in April, the average sales price in Montgomery County was up 4.83%, almost 5% more than it was the same time last year. I think we're going to start seeing that start to fall here soon, especially as we start getting into like the third quarter of the year. As I alluded to earlier, typically, the market does slow down after the spring as we enter a summer market when people go on vacation. A lot of those people that were looking to purchase and make that transition in between the school years, they've done it by the time you get to July. And a lot of them have done it. And now they're on vacation. They're getting ready to move into their new place. And so, I do think that as we start getting deeper into like the summer market and then, later in the summer and then into the fall, I think we're going to start seeing the average prices probably coming down a little bit. Wouldn't you think?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think there's any reason to not think that that's going to happen. I think the only thing that could change that for me is if interest rates improved, and I think that could combat it a little bit. But other than that, I don't think it's going to change.
Well, it seems like Fed Chief Powell just put the kibosh on that one, Craig. So nice wishful thinking there.
Yeah,
but we've already covered that one.
Yeah,
that shit's not happening. So Aaron asked, and this is a good question here. Are you seeing that buyers are having to pay their commission in today's environment? Great question.
Buyers are having to pay their commission.
The buyer broker compensation.
Yeah. Well, no. In this market, in almost every transaction that I've been a part of, my team's been a part of, most of the time the seller is still paying both the listing side of the commission and they're also paying the buyer broker compensation. The way that it works is buyer agent is working with buyer, put together an offer strategy, submit the offer, ask seller to pay buyer broker compensation within that offer. And that's how I see it most of the time. I have very rarely, few and far between, seeing a buyer pay a buyer broker compensation.
And I think we're going to see less of that as the market shifts and becomes more of a buyer's market. You know, I can,
100%.
and you know, what Aaron's alluding to is, you know, last year in August we had changes that were made that were basically in response to the National Association of Realtors settlement, and now buyers. Well, really, I mean, this always kind of was the case, but it wasn't the case. I mean, right now, I mean, buyers are responsible for paying the compensation to their buyer's broker. However, you know, most buyers in most cases are going to, as part of the contract, and as Craig was saying, as their contract strategy, they're going to request and require that the seller pay the buyer broker compensation. And right now, I'm seeing next to no offers out there where they're not coming in with the request being that the seller pay the buyer broker compensation. However, you know, if we turn into you know, a market once again that is low inventory, high demand, that's all subject to change.
Yeah, I think that in those case scenarios, I mean, even in a more competitive market, when a lot of those changes took effect, I didn't see much of an impact. It kind of felt a little bit the same. But you know, I think if you're in a really competitive market for buyers and there's tons of offers going in on a home, I think you start to see the buyer agent compensation get compressed, and maybe it goes from X percentage to a little bit smaller of a percentage. But right now, if you're a seller and your property's sitting on the market and not getting a ton of action, I think you're probably really happy to pay a buyer's agent who brings you a really good offer.
Yep, I agree. All right, so Kelsey asks, a little off topic, but what are your overall thoughts on brand new, ready to move into communities popping up, mostly new townhome communities?
I love them. I hope there's more of them all the time, forever. I mean, more inventory and more options for buyers is never a bad thing, in my opinion. And you know, there's a lot of there's probably agents in our industry that don't necessarily like, you know, working with new construction. I've always had a great time doing it, and you could be a huge resource for your clients if you know how that process works, as opposed to resale homes. So I think, again, if builders, especially with what we talked about before, with, you know, tariffs, our potential tariffs, and, you know, increased costs of goods and building materials, if they can build more homes, I'm all for it.
Yeah. What would, you know, it's kind of an interesting topic, but what are your thoughts? When I'm working with buyers, I mean, one of the questions that I always like to ask, and nobody knows this for sure, but you know, how long do you plan on living in this property? I think that's a very important question to ask. I mean, first of all, I would tell anybody, if they're not going to be living, if they know that they're going to need to sell it or move in 2 to 3 years, I would say don't bother, especially in this market right now. I would say that, you know, you'd need to be at least thinking 5+ years to you know, to make it worth purchasing right now. But I get concerned oftentimes with new construction, especially, you know, being honest, you always are paying a premium for new construction. It's just like, you know, you're going to pay a premium for a brand new car. And the difference between the car and the house is, you know, as they say, when you drive it off the lot, it drops like what, 25% when you drive it off the lot. The difference with the new home is that, you know, it is an appreciating asset that over time, hopefully will appreciate and everything, versus a car, which is just going to be a depreciating asset. However, you know, you do pay a premium for new construction. And I do get concerned sometimes, Kelsey, you know, if you're a buyer, especially a first-time home buyer, and you're thinking, you know, I'm not sure what I want to be doing 2 or 3 or 4 years from now. You know, maybe I need a bigger place. Maybe I would move or whatever. Especially if it's in a community where a huge community where construction is going to be taking place for the next 5-10 years. Now, we don't see a ton of those in Montgomery County because there's just not that much land to build on. But I do get a little bit concerned with that because, you know, it is very hard selling a resale home when you're competing against new construction. Very hard.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I get it from that standpoint, and just to kind of, before you have to wrap eventually, but the question of asking, a prospective home buyer, how long are you planning on living with this home is super important. And you can, for a new construction property or any property, if it's a short period of time, you want to talk with them and, talk about the best case scenario if the home appreciates and, what they could be looking at. If it doesn't really appreciate, hey, would you be open to turning this into a rental property and have someone pay off this asset for you over time, or are you looking to sell this? And having an open dialogue, being very collaborative, but very, very important question: how long are you planning on living in this home?
Yeah, no, I 100% agree because, not everybody is cracked up to be a landlord. And, having gone through the market, Craig, I think you were still in diapers, but, when I went through like the 2007, 2008, 2009 markets, you had a lot of people who ended up becoming landlords. Wasn't there what they planned on doing? They just got stuck. Life happened. They needed to move on elsewhere, and the value of their home in many cases dropped 35% or so, 40%. And so they ultimately ended up renting it out, and they just weren't prepared for that. And so once again, I love the word collaboration. You need to kind of talk about all those things, with your home buyer, about there are other options, as far as, you could potentially sell or you could potentially rent. What does renting look like to you? And, some people just aren't cut out for it. They just don't have the, the strong stomach to be able to deal that. And some people
Right.
do,
Right.
so, I think it's definitely a conversation. I think the worst thing you could do as an agent is like, yeah, you could go ahead and sell. I'm not sure where Craig went there, but, anyways, if he's gone, that's all right. We love him. But anyways, if you, there he's back. You left
Sorry
for a little
about
bit.
that. I was getting a call for a second. I'm probably going to get another one and it's going to bounce me off.
That's all right. That's all right. We're about to wrap up, but anyways, last thing I would
Sorry,
just
Kevin.
say.
I'm doing this from my phone, buddy.
No worries, no worries. So last thing, we've talked mostly about buyers. Just real quick with sellers, we're going to wrap up here in about 5 minutes. The conversation with sellers today is much different than it was before, and it's opposite of what the conversation is with the buyers. What 3 things do you think a seller must do in 2025 to be successful? I mean, what are your top 3? What are your Mount Rushmore things there, Craig? Man, Craig is popular.
Oh,
there he
man,
is.
I'm sorry. Yeah, Kevin,
Is your phone blowing up?
buddy.
All right, I'm going to answer that question. So, top 3 things is you've got to price. Today is not the time to be pricing aspirationally. You need to be real with things. We need to take a look at where, not only what the home sold for 6 months ago, 3 or 4 months ago, but realize that, find out where the flavor of that community is. And today, unlike a year ago where you might have found out what the going rate or going value is for the property and maybe or for the community and priced it maybe 5, 6, 7% above that. Today, I think you need to be pricing it right there where the comps say, and if not, maybe even a little bit less than that. So if you see that the values are coming in around that 600 price range, probably today the highest you want to be is 600. You probably want to be closer to 575. And in many cases, once again, if it's well priced, if it's in great condition, staged properly, photographed properly, marketed online, that oftentimes you still can get multiple buyers in and potentially raise that value up. So I would say my top 3 things right now are price realistically, get the property Q-tip clean, in impeccable condition, nice, clean lines, stage the property. And once again, as Craig said earlier, spare no expense when it comes to photography and video. That is ultimately going to be what people are looking for. The other thing that I'm going to say right now is, and I asked Craig this question earlier, I've had some buyers this year who've said, you know what, little too crazy right now. I want to go ahead and take a breather. We're going to kind of, take ourselves off the market for a little bit. I talked to Craig a little bit off air. He's had some of the same experience as well. And but here's the thing is that they still are watching the marketplace, even though maybe they're not going out and looking at places. Maybe they've stopped going to open houses. Maybe they don't want to go out and tour with you on Saturday or Sunday. The bottom line is, we're still seeing that they're watching things online there and they're peaking. I just think, once again, the difference is right now is where, a 7 on a 10 scale would have made a buyer jump through all sorts of hoops, write an incredible offer at or above list price, 0 contingencies. Today, that same 7 out of a 10 scale or 7 boxes out of 10 probably isn't getting the buyer to do a damn thing. It's going to take a 9 or a 10 to get them to move. So once again, to those home sellers out there, you got to price it well. You got to get it in great shape. You got to stage, and you have to get a great agent who can market that property, and also an agent that's going to work all the angles out there too. Once again, fish just aren't jumping into the boat. You've got to have somebody out there who's constantly reaching out to the public, reaching out to other agents, their network, and continuing to push that property out there and make an awareness for it. It's definitely a lot slower moving right now. So, and I have to be honest with you, patience is not one of my better traits, but I'm telling you, I'm having to learn a little bit more of that in this market right now. So anyways, it looks like Craig has I don't know where the hell Craig went. Hopefully he's okay. I'm going to check on him. I know he's back at our office. I'll check on him a little bit. But anyways, I wanted to thank you guys for watching tonight. I wanted to thank you for your questions and everything. And also just want to do a quick plug out here. You see the referral QR code. If you're watching this this live stream and you are, or maybe you're also watching it on replay after the live event, and you're outside of the DMV and you're looking for a great realtor in your area, go ahead and scan that QR code. You go ahead and fill it out. It'll your name, information. It'll come to me. I'll give you a quick call. Don't worry, it won't harass you, won't stalk you or anything, but just talk a little bit about the type of agent you're looking for, because I've got a vast network of some of the top agents throughout the country. And once again, a great agent is hard to come by. You know what I say. I always say that 80% of all agents out there really suck, and 10% are just and 10% are great agents. Well, I network with some of the top 10% out there. So once again, if you want a great agent, go ahead and fill out that form there. Also, if you want to set up a one-on-one with me to talk about anything that has to do with real estate, would love that opportunity to do so. Just go ahead and scan that Calendly link. Go ahead and check out my schedule, put a time down, and we'll get together for either a 15 or 30-minute Google Meet and discuss whatever it is you want to talk about. So once again, everybody, thanks for joining me tonight. You guys have a great Tuesday. See y'all later. Peace.